Hello, my name is Terry McVenes, and I'm honored to serve as the President and CEO of RTCA. RTCA has a tremendously rich history, having served the aviation community with distinction and effectiveness since 1935, with a focus on standards development, collective decision-making, and consensus building. We're continuing to evolve our organization for the new and emerging trends in aviation, empowering innovation through collaboration, and building upon our legacy and reputation for accomplishment. And towards that goal, we're excited to expand our associations with government and industry partners so that we can best serve the entire aviation community. Today, I'm pleased to have with me Mr. Jens Hennig, the Vice President of Operation for the General Aviation Manufacturers Association here in Washington, D.C. Jens also serves as a member of the RTC Advisory Board. So thank you, Jens, for being here today.
Hey, Terry, how are you doing today?
Great. So Jens, why don't you give us a little overview about GAMA, your membership, and just some broader scope of some of the activities you're involved with?
Yeah, sure. So GAMA was founded in 1970, so we're in our 51st year now. Our members, like the name says, our primary focus is on the manufacture of aircraft, engines, and avionics. But over time, as we just try to define the interests of our members, we started working more and more with the folks on the entry into service, the continued airworthiness. So our membership expanded into the aftermarket MRO and also the training industry. We've seen quite a bit of growth over the past decade, and as of this morning, we're sitting solid at 132 member companies.
Great. You're not just a Washington, D.C. firm either. You've got an international outreach, right, through your office in Brussels?
You're right. We started as a U.S. organization, and that's our focus for the first 25, almost 30 years. But if you think back to the 1990s, globalization was a word that everybody got to embrace, and our membership certainly started working more and more across borders, and our issues became international as well. So in 2000, our board of directors changed our bylaws, and we became an international organization. It's really generated a fantastic organization to work with, and I think our members are excited about it. The fiercest competitors are sitting around the board table, but by getting together at GAMA, they can work on safety and regulatory policy issues that touch them all across the world. So with our origins in the U.S., today we're sitting at about 40% companies that are not headquartered in the United States, and pretty much all of our companies have a presence somewhere in the world. My office, I'm sitting downtown Washington, D.C. right now, just down the street from you, Terry, over in DuPont. I got 3 colleagues over in Brussels, Belgium. While I work primarily with the FAA and occasionally help out our legislative team with the U.S. Congress, their focus is on the Commission, the Parliament, member states, lately Brexit, the UKCA, as it's coming back as well. So you'll recall you and I crossed paths, I think, the first time on one of EASA's advisory boards, right when EASA was coming into play. And, you know, from our perspective, we need a strong and competent FAA. We need a strong and competent EASA as well to ensure that as manufacturer, we can bring our products all across the market. So those are our primary focus. We do also do quite a bit of work with colleagues at ENAC Brazil and Transport Canada, Civil Aviation, really the 4 focal areas for states of design and companies involved with the manufacturing of aircraft and products.
You know, I mentioned some of the new entrants and how innovation is changing, and the whole aviation landscape is really changing, and changing very rapidly with some of these new entrants coming into the market. Have you seen a change in the demographics of your membership as a part of this?
Yeah, very much so. We had always been focused on established manufacturer. I mean, the aviation industry has a high barrier of entry. The names that you typically know in aviation, they're the ones that have been around for decades. But around 2014, 2015, some of the work we were doing on small airplanes, there were new players around the table. So we expanded our membership in 2015 to electric, higher degrees of automation. We were staying away from the UAS work, but there was a manned nexus there that was always core to our business. So we took that step. If you're a student of aviation history, you know that core to any evolution in aviation, it's really the power plant, and electric has really become the core. I think we're gonna see it bring traditional airplanes and helicopters into a new power plant and what that brings to the mission. And we're also seeing these companies leverage the higher degrees of automation, modernization into the airspace and so forth, and some new operational concepts in there. It's certainly not a homogeneous industry. I always get worried when we write down the word AAM or UAM or whatever we call that new exciting part of the industry yet, because one company's aircraft or plan is very different from another one. What we're really focused on as GAMA is trying to flesh out many of these operational concepts. My day job, one of the hats that I get to wear is built around next gen and single European skies and what we really want to do in the airspace. The conversation I've had with many of these companies is when we come to the discussions about comm, nav, and surveillance, RTCA has one of the longest histories in developing those ideas, those concepts. And when you look at this emerging industry, be it AAM or the work that RTCA has been shepherding along since the early 2000s around UASs, the comm, nav, and surveillance considerations there, it's really going to be key to their successes. Every now and then, I volunteered myself onto a couple of special committees, and just the other day, fantastic discussion in Special Committee 228. They're working on an OSED. Wish I remember what an OSED stood for, but they're really fleshing out what's the next evolution of detect and avoid when we get into the space where you're looking at larger cargo work, passenger carry, and so forth. So we all got our work cut out for ourselves, but when it comes to that comm nav surveillance consideration for this space, I think the work that we're going to do with RTCA is going to be really important.
What are some other big initiatives that GAMA's working on right now?
Well, walking into the pandemic, 2018, 2019, if you think back at it, the greening of aviation is really a big focus area of our industry. The real focus on CO2 especially, I mean, we've always worked noise, NOx, and other issues around that, but CO2 really came into focal point in the late 2000s. The broader conversation about CO2 and transportation came into place, and as aviation, we've made certain commitments. Late 18 into 19, the use of new fuels, a real opportunity to both reduce the actual CO2 coming out of the aircraft, if you look at the full life cycle, but also reducing contrails and so forth really came into focus. So what we've seen happen during the pandemic with everything else going on is our industry really been embracing this thing called SAF, which is a synthetically manufactured jet fuel. It's a drop-in fuel. We can use it tomorrow. You don't need a new recertification. And right now we're at a position where demand is really higher than the supply that's out there. And it's a step forward. It's not the end-all solution. We have many other things that we're working on. Aerodynamic considerations, modernizations and winglets, new engines, always a core thing to the modernization and the electric topic we discussed earlier. But SAF is in the near term. Another big thing that's come into play over the past year, you may recall late last year, was the Aircraft Certification Safety and Accountability Act. It's one of many steps, milestones coming out of the two tragic Boeing MAX accidents. While we're on the general aviation side primarily, the certification process that we use for aircraft and product, there's one certification process. There's not one for air transport and one for GA. The way we work with authorities, be it here in the United States or elsewhere around the world, EASA, ANAC, Transport Canada, or wherever we validate into, it's the same process. And that act for the U.S. market really encapsulates the direction we've gotten from Congress based on those tragic events. There's a number of reports look at other processes, validation, how we approach training and safety. This is a real key focus area of our organization right now. The pandemic remains with us. Last spring and last year, and again, I speak from the policy, the broader economic and difficult things I won't get into today, but fantastic cooperation with the regulators. They all moved quickly to provide operational accommodations to our industry. If you needed to train a pilot, bring people across a border, those things were put into place. There's still work to be done. I was impressed. Usually we complain about the lack of quick movement among the regulators, but just fantastic cooperation with all of them. Just hats off, not only working in a strange new environment, but innovative thinking. And I think we want to build on what we learned from that, remote inspections and a number of other things like that. Coming out of it, we still see some issues. The supply chain is a challenge. A lot of our member companies are watching that very closely. As on the business and general aviation side, we fared mostly well. Operations, deliveries, and so forth, 80% normal. Not where we want to see it, but nowhere near where you saw on the air transport side. The challenge looking ahead is obviously with scarce resources, be on the supplier side, attracting new talent to our industry. As air transport comes back, this is going to be something that's going to be with us for a few years going forward.
So GAMA's been a long-standing member at RTCA for many years. GAMA's always been a part of our governance structure as well. And as you mentioned, you participate in many of our special committees. Why is the relationship with RTCA so important to you at GAMA?
Yeah, you're right. I just joined the advisory board recently. My boss had that role for a while, and prior to that, I had the pleasure of being on the PMC for many years, and so have colleagues. To me, the core, the bread and butter of RTCA will also always be the special committees, the development of the standards, especially in the ComNav surveillance, ATC modernization space. I don't think there's an organization like yours. I know fantastic cooperation with EuroK, of course, also, and you manage that really well. I think RTCA also has that ability to work toward consensus on policy issues, select policy issues, not necessarily everyone, where you really have strong and very divergent views across the aerospace industry. RTCA Task Force 3, the Free Flight Task Force, and then Task Force 5, to me, they were core to introducing NextGen. We didn't call it that back then, and then really refining what NextGen was going to be. So that kind of exercise where you have so many diverse voices across the industry. From the manufacturer side, Task Force 4, this one really focused on certification. We don't talk about it very often, but it built on that core work around standards. Your organization develops the MOPs and what we build to, but they're recognized through TSOs and the issuance of STCs and so forth. That Task Force 4 exercise is still core to how we certify products today. So again, bringing together those voices, laying out a long-term roadmap, those are just great things that RTCA does for our industry.
Well, great, Jens. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us today, and thank you for being a part of the RTCA family. I've been speaking today with Mr. Jens Hennig, the Vice President of Operations for the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, a very active member in RTCA. If you are interested in learning more about our standards development work, have any questions about our training, or interested in becoming a part of the RTCA family of members so that you too can have a voice in developing aviation standards, please contact us directly through our website at www.rtca.org or via telephone. Thank you for listening.